Tonight, worldwide threats. All eyes on China as top U.S. intelligence leaders testify on the dangers to global security. Plus, toxic train. The investigation into Norfolk Southern after the massive derailment devastating an Ohio town. And little blue men? The Chinese militia named for their blue boats, putting others at risk in the South China Sea.
We Filipinos need to stay strong as well, so that the Chinese will see we're not scared of them.
All this and more, tonight on Faith Nation.
The threat of China to global security. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
From the CBN News studio in our Washington bureau, I'm John Jessup. Well, China poses a serious safety and security threat to the United States. That was the consensus among top intelligence officials who testified on Capitol Hill right here in Washington on the leading global threats.
The hearing comes just a month after the Chinese spy balloon was shot down in U.S. airspace. Now, a bipartisan group of senators is pushing a bill to give the president greater authority to restrict technological foreign threats. White House correspondent Abigail Robertson joins us with more in tonight's top story. Abigail?
Well, one thing gaining bipartisan support in Washington right now is banning the incredibly popular Chinese-owned app called TikTok. In a hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee, top security officials testified as to why Chinese apps and software pose a growing national security threat.
This is not about TikTok. This is about any app, any electronics that are coming from China.
FBI Director Christopher Wray says TikTok screams out with national security concerns, explaining he believes the Chinese government could use it to drive narratives and divide Americans against each other.
Could they use TikTok to control data on millions of users?
Yes.
Could they use it to control the software on millions of devices given the opportunity to do so?
Yes.
Another hot topic is why the Intelligence Committee is divided on the origins of COVID-19.
Basically, there's a broad consensus in the intelligence community that the outbreak is not the result of a bioweapon or genetic engineering. What there isn't a consensus on is whether or not it's a lab leak, essentially as Director Wray indicated, or natural exposure to an infected animal.
Senator Susan Collins claims China's actions to hinder the investigation into the origin of the virus are not the actions of an innocent party.
I just don't understand why you continue to maintain on behalf of the intelligence community that these are two equally plausible explanations. They simply are not.
Senator James Lankford questioned Director Wray about a leaked memo warning of violent extremist Catholic ideology.
We do not and will not target people for religious beliefs, and we do not and will not monitor people's religious practices. That's not acceptable.
That is completely not acceptable.
Lankford added he wasn't surprised to see the source of the memo was a Southern Poverty Law Center.
But for whatever reason, the FBI continues to be able to count on them for who's the listing of a hate group. They have a long history of having anti-Christian bias. And there's multiple different...
And all the intelligence officials that testified today agreed TikTok poses a national security threat to the U.S. And this week, the White House announced they support the bipartisan bill that would give the president the power to ban foreign-based technologies like TikTok, which currently has over 100 million American users. John, Jenna.
All right, thank you, Abigail. And here now for more, author, columnist, and speaker Gordon Chang. Gordon, good to have you with us this evening. So it's pretty rare to find bipartisanship here in Washington lately, maybe with the exception of China. Whether it's the Senate bill to give the president greater authority or the move to ban TikTok, why do you think we're seeing so much agreement on both sides of the aisle?
China has been pushing the United States, and it's not just the spy balloon, it's the spread of COVID, fentanyl, theft of U.S. intellectual property, you name it, and China's pushed too far. The issue here, though, is not consensus. The issue is what to do and how fast to do it. And on those two last issues, we don't have that consensus, but I think we're moving towards it.
Gordon, I understand you believe war with China is coming, suggesting that it will happen on the American homeland. You tweeted earlier today that the Chinese military will take down our grid, turn off our water and spread disease. That's a pretty provocative statement. What do you base that on, Gordon?
Well, of course, China can hack into any network in the U.S. because we don't have adequate defenses. But also, we've got to remember that as we move to a 5G world, the Internet of Things, all devices are going to be connected. And we have a lot of Chinese-made devices in our country, like the drones. And then, if all of that weren't bad enough, we have these big cranes, port cranes, that are meant to be connected to China so China can troubleshoot them, which means that they can then manipulate them and steal data. You put all that together, and it means that China can do what's obvious, and that is, in the first moments of a war, manipulate our infrastructure, take it down, the grid, water, all the rest of it. So unfortunately, this is well known. You know, we've known about this for a very long time. People have not focused in on it because people have not wanted to think about what war would look like. And by the way, war is not inevitable. It's just that we're moving towards it, and we have to ask ourselves, what is going to stop the momentum to war? Right now, there's not very much.
Well, speaking of war, there's open speculation about whether China will help Russia in Ukraine. What is holding China back from withholding military aid?
Nothing is holding China back because it's already been providing lethal assistance to Russia from the very beginning. You know, recently we've had this reporting about China selling drones to the Wagner Group for use in Ukraine. The Breaking Defense website has talked about how an AN-124, which is the biggest cargo plane in the world, leaves China almost daily, taking ammunition and other high consumption rate items. The Biden administration, I believe, has an obligation to tell the American people why all of these reports are wrong or why it was not telling the truth to the American people. But this is well known, Jenna, and so therefore the Biden administration needs to get off this, oh, you know, China might do this. It's already been doing it.
Real quickly, in the 30 seconds or so we have left, is there anything that can be done to thwart China's growing aggression, or is it too little too late, Gordon?
There's a lot that we can do. We've so much more powerful society than China, but we don't have the political will. We need a president who is going to stand toe-to-toe to China and say what they are doing to the American people and what they're doing to our friends and allies are unacceptable, and that we will impose costs. Unfortunately, we don't have that type of president yet.
All right, Gordon Chang, author and columnist, thank you so much for your time and your insights tonight.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Jenna and John.
Well, the National Transportation Safety Board is launching a special investigation into safety at railway company Norfolk Southern. Just yesterday, the company announced a train conductor was hit and killed in Ohio. That was just one of 5 incidents the NTSB cited when announcing their probe. Also noting a train derailment last week and that crash last month in East Palestine, Ohio, of a train carrying hazardous materials that caused an environmental crisis. The NTSB says it's concerned about the, quote, safety culture at Norfolk Southern. A concern shared by lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Norfolk Southern's president and CEO expected to face tough questioning tomorrow as he testifies in a Senate hearing about the East Palestine derailment and its rippling environmental effects. Well, the search continues for the gunman who kidnapped 4 Americans in Mexico and killed 2. Meanwhile, pressure is rising for the United States to do more to fight cartels. At a press conference today on preventing fentanyl from crossing the southern border, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham announced legislation to designate some of the Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
This problem is a national security threat. Fentanyl is a killer, and the people killing Americans reside out in the open in Mexico.
Labeling drug cartels as terrorist organizations sets the stage to use U.S. military force against the groups.
Facing pressure from his own party. The latest on the president and all things politics. Next on Faith Nation.
Welcome back. We're starting to see a break in the ranks in the Democratic Party, with President Biden receiving backlash from members of his own party over immigration policy. The administration is considering reinstating the practice of detaining migrant families who illegally cross the border together, though not to be confused with family separations. The Trump-era policy was ended on humanitarian grounds once President Biden took office. While Title 42 is set to expire on May 11th, the Department of Homeland Security is discussing reviving family detentions, angering rank-and-file Democrats. Immigration policy is a top priority for Senator Bob Menendez. He told Axios, quote, "The lack of communication on immigration-related policy decisions is an insult. It would be like making civil rights legislative ideas without checking with the Congressional Black Congress."
And joining us now, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor, Nathan Gonzalez. Nathan, good to see you. So Axios, in that same article, the headline of that article, Biden is back in hot water with Dem lawmakers. They're pretty unhappy with possibly reinstating that Trump-era border policy. Also, a D.C. crime law the president sided with Republicans last week. Nathan, how politically damaging potentially is this inter-party criticism to the president, especially as he considers a 2024 run?
Yeah, well, there's no question that Democrats are frustrated, and this is, I think, where the task of governing and also the election kind of come into a collision. Specifically, both on the border and immigration and on the crime bill, I think you have a president of the United States who is aware that one of his vulnerabilities and the Democratic Party's vulnerabilities is on crime and immigration. In the last election, crime and immigration, it was about the third or fourth top issue, but Republicans, those people who prioritize those issues, voted for Republicans by a wide margin. But when you break it down, even though Democrats are frustrated, when we get to a general election, they're going to still support President Biden. Those are just a choice between two people, and no matter how frustrated they are with Biden, they're not going to support either former President Trump or Governor DeSantis or whomever the Republican nominee ends up being. So he has to be aware, but it still hasn't reached the point of being a general election crisis for the president.
Nathan, the tragic kidnapping and killing of Americans in Mexico has brought about a renewed focus on border security. Some lawmakers, as you just heard earlier, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, are considering listing cartels as terrorist organizations. Nathan, do you really envision seeing the U.S. military engage with Mexican cartels? Is that a substantive solution?
Well, we should be open-minded about the possibilities, right, and envisioning lots of different scenarios. I will leave it to the policy experts to break down what this would mean. I hope that everyone involved in the discussions are operating in good faith, and it's not just a political decision, so that all these members of Congress are able to say, oh, we declared these cartels terrorist organizations just to put it in an ad, because there are real consequences and potentially unintended consequences for a major policy decision. So it appears that we're headed down that track, but it's going to be we'll see once it gets enacted if it plays out like everyone thinks it will.
Let's talk about January 6th, Nathan. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy gave Fox News exclusive access to more than 40,000 hours of footage from the Capitol that day. Democratic and even some Republican lawmakers are decrying that move. Nathan, does this reignite the whole issue on January 6th, or will we see this kind of fizzle out?
Well, it does bring up a very painful day, and I think in our nation's history. And I think part of the frustration is not that the video was released, but that the selective choosing of pieces of over 40,000 hours of a video of what happened that day, and choosing some videos that do look peaceful, where people are walking, and contrasting those with the very real video of people beating police officers with American flagpoles and rioting in the Capitol. I don't think this is going away anytime soon, because now there is a lot more sort of footage and a lot more maybe information that was out there about January 6th that wasn't out there before.
Yeah, myself and one of our producers were just talking earlier today about seeing footage that we had never seen before. Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Nathan. Well, fishermen under fire. The aggressive tactics China's maritime militia is using to dominate the South China Sea. After this. Welcome back. With U.S. agencies differing on their stance on how COVID-19 began, lawmakers today put the possibility of a lab leak under the microscope, debating the origins of the global pandemic in a House hearing that highlighted the continuing divide. And just last week, the Department of Energy concluded the coronavirus stemmed from a lab accident, though noted low confidence in that conclusion. FBI Director Chris Wray also confirmed his agency thinks the pandemic was most likely caused by a lab leak.
Well, domination of the South China Sea. It's a major goal of Beijing, and just over the last decade, the communist regime has deployed significant military assets to achieve that end, intimidating any country using the key international shipping lane.
And now fishermen whose livelihoods depend on the waterways are caught in the crosshairs. George Thomas brings us the story of their struggles firsthand from Manila.
Spend any amount of time with J.C. Cabanillas on the water, and you'll soon discover what puts a smile on his face.
I feel the happiest when I'm at sea. This is the kind of job where you don't have a boss. It's based on your decision whether you'll go to sea or not.
3 generations of Cabanillas' family have fished these waters here off the Philippine coast. That livelihood now faces an increasing threat from China.
Every time Filipino fishermen go to the West Philippine Sea, they will be greeted by Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese fishermen. No matter how far they are, they will be reminded that you have entered Chinese territory, so you have to leave.
Fernando Haicap runs the nation's largest fishing federation, some 80,000 members. He says that China's claim to South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, puts fishermen like Cabanillas on the front lines of a possible military confrontation with Beijing.
Before the occupation of the Chinese government in the West Philippine Sea and larger South China Sea, area used to be a fishing ground for all fishermen from different countries: Malaysians, Indonesians, Vietnamese, Taiwanese, and Chinese. During that time, there were no stories of fights or rivalry between the fishermen. But now, the Chinese presence is so destructive.
The Philippine government warned world leaders at the recent Munich Security Conference that China's harassment of Filipino fishermen and the country's Coast Guard is now a daily occurrence.
It's clear to us what China wants. They want to occupy the West Philippine Sea and the whole South China Sea.
A Chinese Coast Guard ship hit a Philippine Coast Guard vessel last month with a military-grade laser, temporarily blinding some of the crew aboard the Philippine vessel. Several Filipino fishermen were also targeted and forced to move away from the area. The Philippine government lodged more than 200 protests against Chinese intimidation and harassment in 2022 alone.
JC here has been fishing these waters off the coast of the Philippines for more than 35 years. And today, so many of his colleagues who fish these same waters are urging the Filipino government to do more to challenge the Chinese.
To avoid direct military confrontation and still maintain a high level of intimidation, the Chinese government has deployed a maritime militia, mostly made up of commercial Chinese fishermen, to prowl these waters.
They are trained by the PLA Navy, and their wages are funded by the PLA Navy.
Retired Navy Captain Carl Schuster, a former director of operations at the U.S. Pacific Command's Joint Intelligence Center, says the militia has hundreds of commercial boats and thousands of crew members at their disposal.
The advantage of using the maritime militia is ostensibly they are commercial craft. If you check the ownership papers, they go back to a commercial entity somewhere, and that gives the Chinese government plausible deniability.
In 2021, more than 200 Chinese fishing boats converged on the Whitsun Reef, an area under Philippine control in the South China Sea.
Their basic tactics is to intimidate local fishermen into leaving the area so that China gains control of the waters by default.
The militia, dubbed as China's Little Blue Men because of the blue-painted color of their vessels, are trained to carry out offensive maneuvers, especially around disputed territories.
It's called gray zone operations. They stop short of committing an act of war, but they will use their water cannon on local fishing boats. They'll bump them, ram them, sink them, and then leave them.
Experts say China's hybrid warfare here is similar to how Moscow deployed its Russian Little Green Men to infiltrate and take over Crimea in 2014.
And in theory, they could do even more than that. If they ever wanted to launch an attack, they could even use some fishing boats clandestinely or surreptitiously to carry weapons or carry soldiers.
It's one big reason why the Philippines and neighboring countries are reluctant to openly challenge the Chinese on the high seas.
When they come up on one of these craft violating local rules, are they approaching a purely commercial craft or are they approaching an armed ship? Nations, particularly in Southeast Asia, where China is much more powerful than they are, they're very wary of interfering with any Chinese commercial fishing activity for fear of what they might actually be encountering.
Back on his boat, J.C. Cabanillas is thrilled that the United States and the Philippines are strengthening their military ties. Both countries are set to resume joint patrols of the South China Sea.
We Filipinos need to stay strong as well, so that the Chinese will see we're not scared of them. The more we look intimidated, the more they want to occupy us.
George Thomas, CBN News, Manila.
Thanks, George. Paving the way for a new era of space exploration. We explain next.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
All right, finally tonight, the world's first 3D rocket was set to blast off to space, but late this afternoon, the mission was scrubbed. The company Relativity Space is set to reschedule the maiden voyage of Terran 1 in the next few days.
While 3D printing has been used in elements of space exploration in the past, this is the first time a rocket has been built almost entirely by 3D technology. Terran 1 is 110 feet high with a total of 10 3D printed engines. Relativity Space believes 3D printing will make rocket building faster, aiming to transform them from raw materials in as little as 60 days. The upcoming mission, dubbed the nickname Good Luck, Have Fun, hopes to successfully reach orbit and revolutionize space industry. The code name, though, didn't seem to work out too well for them today.
not such great luck.
Maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that down the road.
Well, thanks so much for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great night.